Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
How are you? How are you doing? Have you slept well?
I have, thank you very much.
Good.
And it's great to be here on Radio Leeds.
I am really glad that you are here as well, because since Friday, since your Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget, the pound has dropped to a record low. The IMF has said that you should reevaluate your policies, and the Bank of England has had to spend £65 billion to prop up the markets because of what they describe as a material risk. Where have you been?
Well, I think we've got to remember the situation we were facing this winter. We were facing a situation where people could have had to pay energy bills of up to £6,000, where inflation was increasing, and where we were looking at an economic slowdown which would have had a huge impact right across the country, including in places like Leeds. So we had to take decisive action. And that's why we took action to make sure people aren't paying a typical fuel bill of more than £2,500.
Yeah.
That's going to come in this Saturday.
That was before the mini-budget, though, Prime Minister. I'm talking about the last 4 days. Where have you been? Because we've not heard from you in the last 4 days.
Well, I'm here today on Radio Leeds talking to you.
Brilliant. I'm so glad
The
that
point
you are.
The point I'm making is that we had to take decisive action to help people through this winter and next winter. I understand that families are struggling with their fuel bills, and we had to take urgent action to get our economy growing, get Britain moving, and also deal with inflation. And of course, that means taking controversial and difficult decisions. But I'm prepared to do that as Prime Minister, because what's important to me is that we get our economy moving, we make sure that people are able to get through this winter, and we are prepared to do what it takes to make that happen.
Speaking of getting the economy moving, speaking of growth, how do you think your, controversial risk has gone?
Well, what it has done is it has made sure that people and businesses will be paying lower taxes. It's opened up new road projects, new infrastructure projects, which will mean that we can get on with doing the things that will help people, whether it's getting to work, setting up their own business, and growing the economy. And what it's done is made sure that businesses and people are protected from these very high fuel bills this winter. And let's remember why we're here. We're here because of Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. That's pushed up global energy prices. Countries are under pressure around the world. Currencies are under pressure around the world. And that's why it's so important that this government took urgent action. And within a week of becoming Prime Minister, I took urgent action on the energy bills. We've taken urgent action through our fiscal statement, and we will continue to make sure that we are on the side of people who work hard, who do the right thing, and making sure that people aren't facing those very, very high energy costs.
Well, speaking of, what has actually happened, did you know that there was a risk of this happening, the pound dropping to a record low? Because at the moment, we're not seeing growth in the UK. We're seeing the pound dropping. We're seeing the IMF getting involved. We're seeing the Bank of England having to intervene.
We're working very, very closely with the Bank of England, and it's important that we have an independent Bank of England. They're responsible for setting interest rates. And of course, the Chancellor and the Bank of England work closely together. We're facing very, very difficult economic times. We're facing that on a global level. I talked to a lot of my overseas counterparts about issues like energy, about making sure that we're dealing with those global economy. But the important thing is that the British government acted to make sure that people are protected from these high energy costs, to make sure we're getting the economy going. And of course, a lot of the measures that we've announced won't happen overnight. We won't see the growth come through overnight. But what's important is that we're putting this country on a better trajectory for the long term.
But how long will that take? Because at the moment there are people who can't wait. They can't wait for things to get better, to get worse before they get better.
Well, the fuel action, the action we've taken on fuel bills will start this weekend. And we acted quickly.
But that's in terms of what's going on with inflation, with what's going on with the economy at the moment. Is that not just a drop in the water?
The national insurance reductions will happen this autumn. That's why we had to take urgent action to make sure people aren't facing those higher national insurance bills. And the projects that we want to get on with, like the road projects, the broadband projects, the mobile projects, those will be happening over the next year. So we're getting things done as quickly as we can to get our economy moving, but also, most importantly, making sure we're supporting families and businesses through what is a very tough winter.
So I just want to tell you, because a lot of people have been getting in touch with us, Liz, about what they would ask you if they were here. There's lots of people in West Yorkshire who are struggling. Have a listen to Lee. We met him at a food bank here in West Yorkshire. This is what he had to say.
If it weren't for the food bank, I wouldn't be able to feed my children and myself. I'm just at the amount where I can't claim any help whatsoever. And then you get the small pay rises, and then everything just goes up. Not only am I working harder than ever at work, prices of everything going up, as electric and gas bills are going to go through the roof soon. I have a wife who suffers with mental illness as it is, and it's quite hard. You try to cope on the outside, but I'm not really well, to be honest with you.
That's quite heartbreaking to listen to, Prime Minister. What would you say to people like Lee? And there are lots of them listening in West Yorkshire right now.
Well, the issues that Lee raises, and is clearly very, very difficult for people. It's very difficult for Lee. But the issue he raises, like inflation, the package that we put forward on energy is going to reduce, or likely to reduce, inflation by up to 5%. The action we've taken on energy bills will mean that Lee and other people living in West Yorkshire aren't going to be facing energy bills of £6,000, which is what was forecast. They're going to be those through the energy price guarantee. The maximum will be £2,500, and the action we're taking on the economy to get the economy growing is all about making sure that people have higher wages in the future, that we are getting the investment into places like West Yorkshire, that we are building those new roads, that we are helping businesses get on, so that we can have that higher wage economy. So this is exactly the reason we're doing what we're doing, is to help people like Lee through this winter,
Prime
but
Minister.
also make sure that he has a secure future in the long term.
Thank you for being here. I don't know whether that answer will help Lee in the short term. I don't know whether that will give Lee any hope for the long term, but thank you for being here nonetheless. Prime Minister Liz Truss there, here with us on BBC Radio Leeds with me, Rima. I will have to let you go, Prime Minister. Lots of other local radio stations waiting to have their turn.
Take on your first Conservative conference as leader. You're being urged to recall Parliament. You're being urged to row back on some of the tax cuts that were promised in the budget. Does a strong leader stick to Plan A regardless, or do they admit when things haven't gone to plan and change course?
This is the right plan that we've set out. This is about making sure that people are going into the winter not worried about ultra-high fuel bills, which is what we were looking at. It was simply unconscionable that we could have allowed that to happen, and we could allow people to be facing that fear of not being able to pay their fuel bill. And it's also important that we're taking steps to improve growth levels in our economy, because if we don't, we're not going to get the high wage jobs, we're not going to get the opportunities, we're not going to get the investment that we need to see in our county and across our country. And of course, there will always be people who oppose a particular measure. There will always be people, and it's not necessarily easy, but we have to do it.
Let's talk about fracking. We're the only area of the country that's actually done it, and it caused earthquakes. People's houses shook. Why do you think it's safe to continue? Because none of the science has changed.
Well, what I want to be clear about is that we will only press ahead with fracking in areas where there is local community support for that, and the Business Secretary has been very clear about that. Now, fracking is carried out perfectly safely in various parts of the world, and the Business Secretary will make sure that any fracking that takes place is safe. But it's very important for me as Prime Minister that any fracking has local community consent. But I think we have to be clear about why we're doing this. One thing that has happened is that the UK has become dependent on global energy prices. And We've seen through Vladimir Putin's appalling war in Ukraine how energy prices have shot up, and Russia has used the fact that it produces gas as a way of exerting pressure on other countries. And we simply don't want to be in that position. So what I want to see is more homegrown energy in the UK.